Hey, sister friend, do you remember what it was like to be a little kid? And maybe you still do this, no judgment, but do you remember being a little kid and you'd be in bed at night and you'd look across your room and all of a sudden it looked like there was a three-headed monster, dinosaur, or like a clown across the room? And you'd be sitting there paralyzed with fear, or maybe you would call out for someone to come turn on the light. And then the light gets turned on and you're like, oh, it was just my sweater or my coat rack or whatever thing it was across the room. You know, so nothing really changed about the room, right? You just had a new perspective. The lights were turned on and you saw what you saw with a new set of eyes. And I think that homeschooling and the fear of it, the anticipation of it, and all the unknowns that are coming is a lot like that. You can't really see what's on the other side. And, we think that if everything was just right, if my home was just right, if the kids went back to school or whatever, if everything was just so, then it would be good. But sometimes that answer to prayer, that miracle that you're wanting is you. It's a change of heart in you. It's a change of perspective in you. And I found that with myself when I took my circumstance and I looked at it and I looked for what was true and lovely and good, and God did a change of heart in me. My environment didn't necessarily change. I didn't necessarily get all the things just right, but my perspective was different, and I saw the same situation with a new set of eyes, and then the goodness and the beauty comes out of it. And so lean into today's episode. Pamela drops so many nuggets that will encourage you in your perspective shift, and she'll also offer so many resources for this journey. Hey friend, welcome to the Optimize to Scale podcast. I'm Jacqueline, your host. You're in the right place if you are a virtual assistant or a service provider or looking to become one. I'll be sharing with you the secrets I learned working with high-level entrepreneurs. You'll also get tactical, tangible trainings to help you optimize your time, your tech, your tools, and your talents. Let's get started. Hey guys, I want to introduce you to Pamela Smith. She is a wife, a veteran homeschooler, mother of 4 children, a nurse, speaker, and an entrepreneur. She's president of a healthcare company and homeschool center where she helps hundreds of families by offering academic enrichment and college credit classes for homeschoolers. She resides in South Florida and also owns 41 acres of land in Montana where she and her husband plan to build their future homestead. I'm so excited to have you here, Pamela. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So honored to be here.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to just jump right in and give people some meat, something to work with. A lot of people are on a time crunch because they're going to have to homeschool right now and they've never done it and they have a middle schooler. And so I want them to get a little bit of a backdrop about your journey with homeschooling. Did you always homeschool or did you start at a certain age with your children?
Well, first off, we have 4 children. We have a 24-year-old, 18-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And so with our oldest 2, our younger children have always been homeschooled. They've never stepped foot in a school. My oldest one, she went to public school until about 3rd grade. And we put her in private school. And then my now 18-year-old went to private school up until 3rd grade. And so we made the switch with our oldest one when she was in middle school to be homeschooled. And then our 18-year-old became homeschooled when she was in the 3rd grade.
That's awesome. You've had the experience of starting from the start and starting a little bit later on. That's awesome. You have great perspective then. And so what made you decide to homeschool the first child, when you pulled them?
It was a variety of things. It was mostly being that we're African American. We were in a predominantly white Christian school, and there was very few African American children. And at first, we had this idea that, our kids being in a prestigious private school, Christian school, they were going to get the best, education. And it just wasn't the case. And we started to see our children's character change for the worse, because they were around a lot of I'll say rich kids, where doctors and lawyers, children were in these schools. And one of the things I found out was that people in those schools don't necessarily believe in the faith. They just don't want their kids in public school. And so we still saw the drugs there. We still saw bad behaviors in that private school situation. And then my children started to be bullied because they looked different. And my oldest at the time started coming home wanting to change her hair, wanting her hair straight, wanting to look like the white girls, being teased by white boys who were saying she was a spaz and all this stuff. And when she came home in tears, I said, you know what? I don't care. Something's going to have to shift. I can't have my kids in this situation. And then the other thing, they're wanting to keep up with the rich kids. They're wanting to wear $100 flip-flops. That's not who I want my children to grow up to be.
Wow.
So
yeah.
that was one of the major reasons was that.
Sure. I could definitely relate to what you're talking about. And so I have two questions, but one of them is, when you made that shift, was it easy for your child to adjust to, I'm now mom and teacher, is my first question from the audience. But the other one is, how did you find the curriculums? That's really the big one that everybody wants to know. What's out there? How did you find it? And I know you mentioned, I'll start with that. I get excited and I want to know everything about how did you find the curriculums, and how did you make that switch for them to see you as a teacher?
I made that switch not knowing anyone else at homeschool. Nobody in my family had ever homeschooled. In fact, our family thought we were crazy. But I heard the Lord, and the word of God says, the day you hear his voice, harden not your heart. And all I know is the Lord said, do it. And I'm the type of person that if God says do it, I trust him that, I may not see but a couple steps in front of me. And that's basically, I jumped in not knowing what I was doing. And so I did a lot of research. So parents out there will really need to become researchers. And that's what I did. I made the mistake that a lot of parents make, is you think that you need to recreate school. And so you don't realize that you're pulling them out of school so that you're not wanting to be in that system anymore. Because we know schools were made for the industrial age. And so this is why you see the roles in the classroom. They were really making factory workers. And so I had the desk, I had everything set up, and it was torture. And so I had to learn how to relax and understand that I am not necessarily a teacher, but a facilitator of my child's learning. And that's what the Lord had to teach me, is that I'm a facilitator. So I became a facilitator. They need to learn algebra. I found ways for them to learn algebra, whether it was online, whether it was hiring a tutor to come in. Some of the younger kids, the subject matter is real easy. Mm-hmm. But as they get up into upper middle and high school, that's when I started looking into other options. My oldest daughter, basically from that middle school age all the way through high school, she did an online program. So she was on an online homeschool program where there was teacher support and all of that, but she was at home. And then I supplemented that with extracurricular things. She ran track. She became a track star. She played basketball. She was really good in basketball. So there's a variety of different ways. And the first thing I would tell parents is to find your child's learning style, because you could spend a lot of money in curriculum and that curriculum not match your child's learning style. So going on Google and doing a learning style assessment to find out what type is your child, an audible learner or visual? Are they more hands-on? So that is very important. And then from there, there's a ton of websites out there that I use to find curriculum. But the best place to go is Facebook groups. Okay. If you type in homeschool curriculum in Facebook, there's a ton of groups that come up where other moms are selling used homeschool curriculum.
Okay. There's one thing that a lot of moms, African-American moms, are wondering is, how do I find those history curriculums or those books that tell the full story or that show children in the books that look like them? Do you have resources you would recommend? Do you have a list of your favorites? Anything like that can give people a starting place?
I would say right off, one of the things to teach history that I had to do was use literature. Literature was my go-to because I have not found a complete curriculum that tells the whole story. So what I've had to do was piece together curriculum using literature. So we read different books. I have a massive African-American collection of books at home. So whether it's Harriet Tubman or Josiah Henson, my children are reading literature. And so this is how they're learning our story. It's by reading books. And from there, you can put together all kinds of unit studies where you can create quizzes from these actual books.
Can you give an example of what you mean by creating a quiz from a book? Like, what is the steps? What do you mean by that?
Let's say, my children are learning about Jesse Owens, the great Olympian, having them read the book, then creating, one of the things I do is with my little ones, I'll read the book before they do. And then create going into Microsoft Word and creating questions from that book and just seeing if they're retaining it, just to see, did they understand what was going on? Then from there, pulling out things. Like my 18-year-old right now is reading the story of, when people say Uncle Tom, because our society doesn't understand that Uncle Tom was actually Josiah Henson, outstanding African-American man who Harriet Beecher Stowe met, and that's who inspired her to write Uncle Tom's Cabin. My daughter's reading that book, and from there, she's learning so many different things about the Civil War. You can pull so many things out of literature. So literature has been really what we've had to turn to because there's a very limited amount there's no really comprehensive African-American homeschool curriculum out there.
Sure. Now, what would you say to that mom who, maybe she is working from home because of this whole COVID situation and she wants to do that, but realistically, she may not have that margin to read a whole book before the child and create a quiz and all these things. What is something that you would offer her? What would you suggest for someone like that who kind of has to maybe be at their computer a little bit more than the traditional homeschooling mom who's able to give full attention? Do you have any recommendations for someone like that?
I would say if the mom can't read ahead, would just have the child to read the book and then just have them write a book report. Book reports are really good. Have them to write it. If they're younger, they can draw pictures to tell the story. Just give their interpretation of what the story was about. Also looking into YouTube. There's a ton of Black history things on YouTube that children can watch, that they can actually learn about different African Americans using YouTube. Also, Netflix and Amazon Prime have a lot of movies on there that is kid friendly that children can watch and learn history. So those are also resources that parents can pull from, because the bottom line is that they learn,
Right.
And I always like them writing book reports because it just, now they're practicing their writing skills,
Right. Now, another big question people have, I don't know if you could give an overview. People want to know, how on earth do you actually plan monthly or weekly or daily? How do you structure all of that so that you don't feel crazy all day or that you actually get stuff done?
You mean getting the homeschooling done?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, me being an entrepreneur, I've been an entrepreneur for 14 years. I've ran successful companies while homeschooling, and I'll tell you that we don't do homeschooling every day. And so that's one of the ways is planning the school when I don't have to be in the office. And so that works for us. And on the days that they're not doing school, they're doing extracurricular things. So that's one way of getting it done, is to have it scheduled around if you do work outside of the home, or like me, I work from home, and a couple times a week I go into the office. And you don't have to, the one thing they really do need to do every day is math, because math is repetition.
Yeah.
But you don't have to do schoolwork every day, because you'll find that they get a lot more done at home than they do with school. School, there's a lot of gaps in the day. They go to recess, they go to lunch, they change classes.
Line up.
Yeah. So people always think that kids are getting a ton of instruction and they're not. So you'll find that you can get a lot done in 3 days a week versus what they were doing in school.
What I almost hear you saying is almost giving people permission to make it work for your life instead of trying to recreate the classroom. That's awesome. And the other misconception I think of homeschool moms, I know I heard this a lot, is you must have the patience of insert whatever, Job, or of a saint or whatever. And that's not true. We're homeschooling moms are people, just they're moms, they're women, just like anybody else. However, you do have to create some sort of routine for yourself so that you are able to operate out of patience and choosing joy and all these things. So for you, how do you keep your patience, your cool on those days where you're just like, really, guys?
That's an excellent question. And this is what I tell a lot of new moms is that what I found when I started homeschooling was that God not only wanted to do a work in my children, but he wanted to do a work in me. And so you will find that God is trying to teach you how to walk in the fruit of the Spirit. So patience, and all times God uses homeschooling to really work on us. And so God is really teaching us how to walk in love, how to give grace. So I found that he was really sharpening me and helping me, which also in turn helped me in business, because you need all of those things in business. So that's what I would say is that, allow God to do the work in you. Don't run from that, because there's something that if it gets rough, okay, there's something God is teaching you. With each child, like my son right now, he's the most challenging kid out of all of my kids to homeschool. But I realize it's something that God is teaching me, is something God is teaching him. And I always look at it and say, you know what, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. And despite how he behaves, I don't let that stop me from doing what I know needs to be done. And so remaining in control, remaining calm is important. And also taking time to rest. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if you're not having a good day, it's okay to walk away from the schoolwork and say, you know what, we're not having a good day. Let's just call it quits. Let's go to the park. Today's not a good day for him. And see, that's the beauty of homeschooling. If kids were in school, the teachers would say, oh, he's just acting up. They're not going to give that grace that a parent can give, because we all have off days. There's some days where we just don't feel like doing anything. If we don't feel like doing housework, we say, okay, we'll do it tomorrow. And so taking time also for the homeschool mom to rest is important. My husband and I go out on date nights. Once a year, we take a solo vacation without the kids. So each week, I think it's important that moms take some time to themselves, go to a coffee shop, read a book, make sure the kids get in bed at a certain time so that you can have your own peaceful time in the evenings, so that you can just reconnect with the Lord or with your spouse. And that's important for your own well-being.
If you could say, I heard you say, for example, that homeschooling was it's also a journey for you. And I believe that too. It exposed things in me I didn't know were there, and it refined things in me that needed to be sharpened. So what would you say for you is the greatest lesson you learned through homeschooling your children?
The greatest lesson I could say that I've learned is to understand that this is a calling, and that it's a very important calling. And through homeschooling, you have the opportunity to not only help facilitate your children's learning, but to help develop their gifts and their callings. That is something to be taken very seriously. And it is a great joy to have your children at home. It's not a burden. I think we've been conditioned by our society to think that children are a burden. But the Word of God says children are a blessing from the Lord, and blessed is the man that has a quiver full. And that's what I've learned from this, is that my children are not someone else's responsibility. They're my responsibility, and no one else should be raising them 5 days a week, 6-7 hours a day for 9 to 10 months out of the year. That's too much time away from mom and dad. Our children need our influence. We get a short window to raise them, a very short window. And when they're gone from us, those are hours that someone else is influencing them. And so It's very important that's one thing I learned, that this is not something, for us, school is not an option. I don't care how tempting it looks. Someone could offer us free tuition at a private school. We'd say no, because we understand that role that God has given to us. All of our children have entrepreneurial mindsets. Several of our children have launched businesses. And that's all because of my husband and I's influence over them. They've got a chance to see us day in and day not out in business. So it's become a part of them. So for us, it's about leaving a legacy. We want to leave a legacy to our children.
Yeah.
So we just don't want any other influences in their lives.
Yeah, I hear it. Now, what would you say you're learning right now? That was kind of a overview. What have you learned? But what are you learning right now, would you say?
Right now, I'm learning, that's a good question. I guess, especially with my son, it's just more patience, having more patience, really praying more, that I need to be praying more, increasing my prayer life, because with each child's personality is different. And you start to see different things come up in your kids and you're like, okay, I need to be praying more. So I think that's what God is really telling me right now, is to seek his face more.
Earlier, we talked about giving yourself permission to make it work for your family. And I think another thing that moms need to hear is giving them permission to fail, that you're not going to be perfect all the time. So do you have any way that you think something that you maybe perceived as a failure at the time, but you realize it really shaped who you've become or who one of your children have become, or your homeschooling, just how you do life? Do you have a story or situation that you would say was a failure or a perceived failure that actually was a blessing?
Yeah, I mean, I've had failures along the way as it relates to business, and my children have had a chance to see that. I actually run a homeschool center in our town. We typically have over 100 kids every year. And I've had to go through a lot of different things with that. And my children have had to see me kind of fail my way through those situations. And then something happened recently, and my oldest daughter was like, you know what, Mom, everything that you went through, she's like, see how God is blessing you now. And so she was just like, Mama, I've seen you work tirelessly, because I don't take a salary from that. She says, Mom, you helped these children and loved on these children, and you've had people throw knives at you, and yet you still continue to stand. Now look at how God is blessing you. And I'm so glad. At one point when I was going through, I said, I really hate that my children are seeing this. But now I look at it and say, you know what? They needed to see me fail my way to success. They needed to see me work as a servant, so they know what it is to be a servant, and to see that God is faithful. And so I had to remain in that situation and remain faithful so that my children could also see that. And so absolutely, I've definitely had some failures along the way.
Yeah. So it's another thing people need to hear. It is okay to fail. You will not do it perfectly. And I think I even needed to hear that. It's okay to not be perfect. What is one book or article maybe that you would say every homeschooler should read? There's probably a million, but one that you say, look, everybody should really read this.
Morning by Morning. The name of the book is Morning by Morning. Her name is Paula Nabrit. She's an African-American. It's an African-American family. They had 3 boys, and they homeschooled them. They took them out of private school when they were little, and they homeschooled them to Ivy League. They ended up going to Ivy League colleges. I think they went to Princeton. So that is a must book that I think a lot of parents will just be so inspired by.
Okay, you said Morning by Morning by Paula. What was the last name?
Nabrit. I think it's Nabriett. I think that's the last name.
Okay. And so I had a few more questions, and then I'll let you kind of wrap up with, where everyone can find you. But another thing with homeschooling, I know that sometimes it can look glamorous. I'm not really sure why, but sometimes people feel like homeschooling is some kind of elite category of people. Somehow we just can pull it off. But we all know that with things that are worth your while, there is a sacrifice. So what would you say is something you had to say no to, maybe not forever, but temporarily, in order to say yes to homeschooling?
I had to walk away from being the boss, meaning in my healthcare company that I started, I was used to being in the office every day, directing and leading in the office. But when God called me to homeschool, I had to say yes, and I had to be primarily at home. And so I was willing to die to myself. And I would say I die daily. As a homeschool mom, you have to die to the flesh daily and realize that wherever God guides, he provides. And I'll tell you, he has blessed my business by me saying yes. My business has not suffered and it has gone to new levels. We became a multi-million-dollar company in the midst of me homeschooling.
Wow.
So, it was just all about obeying God. And when I obeyed God, he just caused everything else to flourish, because homeschooling is important. It's a calling, as it says in Deuteronomy, teach them when they rise up, teach them when they go to bed, when they walk, put it on your doorpost. And so this is a calling from God, and God will take care of your finances. And so me working from home, we really haven't lacked anything.
Wow, that's powerful. So if there is kind of a closing thing that you would want to say to encourage a mom who is going to be new to homeschooling, what would that be? What would you say to them if you had to just give them put a little wind in their sails? What would that be? What would you say?
I would say trust God and don't stress that this too shall pass, that your children won't be behind. You'll find that they're actually advanced. You're not going to mess them up, and they'll have the same opportunities as other children to go to college. My 18-year-old is already has a year of college complete, and she's been homeschooled since 3rd grade. And so don't stress. Don't, just be relaxed and do a lot of research and trust the Lord. That would just be and enjoy. That's the other thing. Enjoy the process because it goes quickly.
Yes, that is awesome. I wish I had you around when I had all my little people, and I was just like, what on earth? But it's definitely worth it, even in the perceived failures and in the difficult moments. So where can everybody find you for homeschooling resources and just to be blessed by your life and the way you give back in the different ways? Where can we find you?
On Instagram, I'm at Black Home Educators. So at Black Home Educators on Instagram. You can follow me there. I do, a lot of posts to encourage homeschooling parents. So that's the best place to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you taking some time to encourage us and put a little wind in our sails on this journey. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, thank you so much for spending these few moments with me. I hope that this episode was an encouragement to you and that you were able to get some value from it. And if you have been thinking, okay, with all these virtual options with school going on, my kids are going to be using a lot of technology a lot of the time. Well, our next episode is all about protecting your kids online and all the different tools that they can use to enhance their learning, but all the ways that you can also safeguard them from the extra things that are not beneficial for them. So come back for our next episode, all things technology.